In many of the YouTube videos I've done on these older diesels, I refer to neglected maintenance items. Now there's a list of them, but there's also a few that are high on the list, and I think it's because of lack of knowledge or even lack of awareness that there could be a problem in a particular area, and so is the case with glow plugs. It's not so much the glow plug itself, because when the glow plugs fail, your engine won't start and you got to change it. You just have to do it. Now this other maintenance item is something that you don't have to do to get the engine to run again, but it needs to be done, and it needs to be done for a couple of reasons. And that is the carbon buildup in the pre-chamber. That's the hole where the glow plug screws into the cylinder head. And over time, due to coking or excessive oil consumption or poor fuel burn or squirting injectors, those pre-chambers will get coked up with carbon, and the carbon will keep building and building and building. And when that happens, you'll start to experience a few symptoms. One is hard starting or rough starting. This is one of the things you go, the engine will start, but it shakes and shudders before, it kind of smooths down. And maybe you've checked, maybe you've used a meter, you followed some of my instructions on my manuals on how to test each one of the glow plugs. Let's say you've tested the glow plugs, they all test fine, but still when you start the engine, it shakes and it's not running smoothly, and then pretty soon you think maybe I got bad compression, or maybe I got, the valves are out of adjustment or something. And maybe you've checked those things and you're still experiencing rough starts or slow starts. It could be excessive carbon in the pre-chamber. Remember, the fuel has to come in and spray into that pre-chamber, and then it has to ignite. And if there's a lot of carbon in there, it affects the fuel burn. Not only does it affect the ability of the glow plug to heat up the pre-chamber properly, but that carbon can also absorb some of the fuel that's being sprayed out from the fuel injectors. So you may start to experience something like loss of power. Maybe it doesn't have the oomph that it used to. Maybe it's smoking more than it should. And many of these things could be related to excess carbon buildup in those pre-chambers. And then finally, if you have a situation where you put new glow plugs in and they burn out 6 months later, the number one issue on that is that excessive carbon can actually touch the glow plug and cause premature failure of the heating element. The other reason that your glow plugs could be failing early is you may have excessive fuel spraying on the glow plugs while it's really hot, and that's something you're going to have to deal with in terms of rebuilding your fuel injectors. But as far as premature failure related to the glow plug overheating or shorting out, that could be due to excessive carbon buildup in the pre-chamber. I've done other videos on this, but I wanted to remind you about this as I'm working here on Casper, this W116 300SD. I don't know anything about the history of this car. It's a very nice car, reasonably low mileage, but I want to just go ahead and pull today one glow plug. Just pull it out, and I want to ream it out. Ream it out and take a look at the carbon. If the carbon is excessive in that one pre-chamber, then I'm going to pull the rest of them out. Whether or not I change the glow plugs, a lot of times by the time I take all those old glow plugs out, even though they may test okay with the meter, I go ahead and replace them. Now remember, the glow plugs we sell are made by Monarch in Germany. These are probably the last glow plugs, that's right, the last glow plugs that are actually manufactured in Germany. Even Bosch, most of their glow plugs are done in Turkey, Spain, wherever. But these Monarch glow plugs have proven to be extremely reliable, and if you get some and they burn out, it's probably not the glow plug. That's the other warning I want to address in this video. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to film pulling out one of these glow plugs. And every time I look at doing this job, I kind of go, oh boy, here we go again. There's a couple approaches. You have limited access down in there to get to these glow plugs, and you've got those fuel injector hard lines in the way. And a lot of times I'll recommend, if you're doing a complete service, just pull the whole set of 5 lines off. You're going to have to reprime the system and everything, but the access becomes difficult. But let's say you find out you have one burnout glow plug, and you just want to check and see how the carbon is. You just want to pull one glow plug. Then you think, oh man, what if I drop that little 8mm nut down in there? Now I've done that, and it goes down in behind the injection pump. You'll never find it again. And trying to get a wrench down in there to both get the 8mm nut off is tough because you're gonna get down, your hand's gonna be jammed down in there between those fuel injector hard lines. So I've come up with a number of tools. These are all tools I've been messing around with over the years to help you get those glow plugs in and out. Just yesterday, I was working on a couple of shorter 8mm wrenches with different angles to see if there's a way I could make it easy for one to get in there and loosen up those little 8mm nuts on the end of the glow plugs. And then you got the problem of when you start turning the nut, the wire starts to turn, and if you're not careful, you'll break the wire. So you got to deal with wires. Once you get the wire off, then you got to get the glow plug out, which isn't exactly that easy on some of these, and then you've got to get the reamer in there and run the reamer in. Once again, if you don't have some of these specialty tools, it's probably just easier to pull all those injector return lines off. I've even developed a special tool. See the curve in that 17mm open end? That's going to allow you to get in there and get those nuts off, particularly on the top of the injection pump, more easy than just a standard 17mm wrench. So now I'm going to take the camera and I'm just going to show you some of these challenges close up. I'll show you some of these tools, and then I want to show you a couple tools that I developed yesterday. I said, okay, I'm going to make this easier for myself. I don't like to work hard. I have to admit, I'm basically lazy, okay? And if I can find an easier way to do a job like removing the glow plugs in these old Mercedes diesels, I will do it. So this is my latest attempt. And you'll kind of chuckle as you see some of the things I've tried to develop to get this job done, and you say, well, that didn't work. And that's all part of the process of trying to develop a new tool. You usually go through 3 or 4 attempts at something that doesn't work very well until you finally come up with something that will. So I hope you find this video helpful when you go to change your own glow plugs in your old Mercedes diesel. As you saw in the previous scene, that access down in here under these hard lines is not all that easy. Once again, we're talking about leaving these on. Once you remove this set of fuel injector hard lines, your access is a lot easier. And you might say, well, Kent, why don't you just get a long wrench? Long wrenches like this are available. Here's a 12mm that will work on the glow plugs, and so you can reach down in there and get right on the glow plug. But look at this. See, even if you get on there, you only have a little bit of movement, so it's going to take forever. And if you're pushing a reamer in, trying to ream the carbon out, a lot of times it doesn't go in easily. You have to push the reamer in. So if you put the reamer in here, I'll show you this, and try to push, it just falls out, falls through. So there's no way there to push the reamer while you're turning it and you're cutting the carbon. So one of the first tools I came up with to help with the reamer was this 12mm wrench that we modified to keep it from dropping through. So this C will allow you to push in while turning. Push in while turning, primarily to use when reaming out the carbon in the pre-chamber, but you can also use this tool when installing glow plugs. If the threads are a little stiff, you need to push in. So you can see that if you don't have that type of wrench, let's go back to this one, and you're trying to push a glow plug in to get the thread started, it's just going to push right through like that. And that's why I developed, this wrench here, and we've been selling this. We've sold hundreds of these. It's a very simple wrench, but all we do here is modify this part of the wrench here so it can't fall through. See that? It'll allow you to push either the glow plug or the reamer into the hole as you're turning it. So that kind of helps with the problem of the glow plugs and reaming, but what about when the hard lines are in place? Look at this. You're not going to be able to use this wrench when the hard lines are in place very easily. You might be able to get to one back here, you might be able to get to this one up front, but eventually you're going to be frustrated unless you have very small hands and can get underneath the hard lines, which I don't have. So when I thought about pulling this glow plug out, I thought, well, one of the first challenges is getting these little 8mm nuts off. So about 6 months ago, I developed this wrench. See those weird angles? And the idea was to put a curve on that so I could get down here and get an angle. I can choose. I can go this way. I can bend it that way. There's a bunch of different ways I can bend it. And then on this end, I have the 12mm, which will allow you to get on the glow plug, but you still have limited travel when you have these injector lines in place. That's been a handy wrench, but I got thinking just the other day, I got to pull this glow plug, demonstrate reaming out the carbon in the old Casper here. It's time for a new tool, something easier. So the first thing I want to do is to find a tool that would make it easy for you to get that little 8mm nut off and to get the glow plug out. So take a look, there it is. A special tool we made here in the shop yesterday. And look at the swivel head and the long handle. I can go in here and I can get right on that 8mm nut and loosen it up. Now there's another problem we run into. You've probably had this yourself where you start to loosen this nut and this wire will start to turn. Well, we found out very early on that you can use our fuel injector return hose plier to go in here on the back side, grab a hold of that wire, and then you can get on the nut and break it loose with this new ratcheting long extension. You see how that works? And then I also went ahead and developed a brand new socket. This one's 1/4" drive, and you can see I had to cut the socket so when I put the reamer in like that, it doesn't go all the way in. Now this socket will allow me to push that reamer in while I'm turning. So that's what I've done. And now let's go ahead and see if it works, okay? The first step is to remove that 8mm nut on the end of the glow plug without damaging the wire. I'm going to repeat, without damaging the wire. You have to be a little careful. Notice here that I can adjust the swivel head and get right down here on this nut. Whether I go here, over here, I can do different angles on the head. So this long-handled, small swivel head ratchet is proving to be very handy when removing these pencil-style glow plugs. Now if I get on here and start torquing it like this, watch that. See that? The wire is moving. And you know, these get on there so hard, sometimes they even get rusted on. If you try to keep turning, you'll break the terminal or actually damage the wire. So I'm going to use these injector return hose pliers and go right down there on the back side and get a hold of that wire. Now I can get this long handle ratchet back on here and loosen it up. Look at that. Okay, I got it loose, right? No problem. But now it's loose, but it won't ratchet because the nut's too loose on the threads. So can I get my hand down in here to spin that nut off? And what happens if I'm not careful and drop that nut? Guess what? It goes right behind the injection pump and you're never going to see it again. You want to ask why I know that. So you have to be really careful when you remove these little nuts. So I decided, okay, I've got to make another special tool to get those nuts on and off without dropping them down, because a ratchet won't work. Because once again, that nut is loose on the thread, so it's just going to go back and forth. And if I bring out one of my clever little bent wrenches I made, see those? I thought, oh, let's make a cool bent wrench. Well, I can't get down there. I'll probably drop the wrench in behind the injection pump. So I had to go back to the workbench and enter the next special tool. You know, nut drivers are ideal for spinning off nuts like this once you've loosened them up with either a box end or a socket. But look at this. I've got this nut driver here. Number one, it's not long enough. And even if it were long enough, I can't get straight on that nut. There's none of these that I can get straight on if I'm going to use some sort of a nut driver. But the nut driver gave me the inspiration to create a long nut driver with a flexible head. So a head that would flex down in there and bend enough so I could get on those nuts and spin them out without dropping them down in the engine compartment. So take a look. Here's my first attempt at this tool. The first thing I did was I got this extendable nut driver. See that? Because some of these I need to get way out, like this one I would need to get way out long, and then if I'm working in this area, you know, I might want to adjust it right about here so I can get down and get on that one. Now I tried universal joints, but universal joints are kind of floppy. So what I've got here is a rubber hose and a wobble extension. So when I put my 8mm on here, look at the flexibility I have. Now I can get right down in between these fuel injector lines, and look at that, I can just spin that right off. Now you have to be really careful here. When you get out to the end, it's going to be really easy to drop that nut. So I'll come in here with a magnet, and I'm going to keep this magnet right here on the end of the socket. So when this nut comes off, it's magnetized to the socket. Now I probably will end up making a special magnetic socket for this operation, but for now I'm just using the magnet. And these threads are pretty long, so you have to turn this quite a bit. So you can see the problem. Okay, let's take the magnet and get the nut. Aha, success, look at that. So you've got a lot of turning to do. So if you don't use something like this nut driver, you're going to be in there with a little wrench turning forever. So you see how slick that is? And it goes especially slick when you go to put these little nuts back on, because you can't get your hand in there and hold the nut and start it. I'm going to pull the wire away, and now I can grab that 12mm socket, and we're going to go ahead and remove the spark plug. Now remember, this is only 1/4 inch drive. It's not designed for excessive torque. So if these glow plugs are frozen in there, you may have to go to a long wrench like this. But let's see if we can break it loose right now. Now I can just slip that on. Look at the angle here. Isn't that slick? All right, let's go. Okay, I got it. Now the glow plugs are usually a little stiffer in there, but once it starts turning, and you go, oh no, look at that, it's going back and forth. No. Okay. Now I've attached the 12mm socket to my adjustable nut driver. I'm going to push this hose out of the way and come on here and just rotate that. Look at that. Now I'm on the glow plug, and watch how I can remove the glow plug. You may discover some resistance here because of carbon buildup, and if the hose starts to twist, then as you see here, see the hose is starting to twist, that means I've probably got carbon on the thread. So I'm going to get my hand in here and just try to assist it. If it won't come out, I'm going to have to get the ratchet back on. Yeah, sure enough. You know, the frustrating part here is it's only going to turn a couple of threads because of the carbon, and then you're going to be back to getting it loose like this. Yeah, I can reach down, put my finger on the socket. If I can just do that, I can lock that socket on there and see if it comes the rest of the way out. Now I can almost get my finger on this one to reach in there and pull it out, but once it's loose, I'm going to grab my injector fuel return hose plier. That is my trusty go-to tool. Okay, it feels like it's loose. It'll keep spinning. I want to warn you, if you have a lot of carbon built up around these glow plugs, it'll even get on the threads, and these can be a real bear to get out. So I think it's loose, but I don't want to drop the glow plug down behind the injection pump either. So to be safe, I'm just going to reach in here with these injector hose pliers, get a hold of this thing. There it comes. Okay, let's take a close look at that. That doesn't look too bad. The tip doesn't look excessively burned. And there's no carbon showing. There's a little bit of carbon on the seat. Okay, now let's put the reamer in there and see what the reamer is going to do. In preparation for reaming the carbon out of that pre-chamber, I've smeared some synthetic grease in the flutes of the reamer. This is going to help catch the excess carbon, and it will come out with the reamer when I'm done. So I'll use these pliers now to just set this in the hole. Oh, look at that. It's not wanting to even go down in the hole. This reamer, by the way, is a little bit bigger diameter than the glow plug tip, but it is the correct size for the machining in that head. So this should slip in there without a lot of effort. So that illustrates the fact that we need a wrench that can push in on the reamer while we're turning it, because the threads haven't even started into the glow plug hole yet. So that's why I cut that socket off shorter, so I could push on the ratchet while turning it. So I'm going to grab that tool now. There are times when you have to almost tap this in. The carbon is so bad, you have to tap this in with a plastic mallet very lightly. Don't hammer hard on it, or you can break the reamer flutes, and you don't want to break the reamer with it in the cylinder head. So I've got it started, which is a good sign. I'll get the wrench on here like this. Okay, I'm pushing it in some more. Now slip it down. Now I can push on the wrench while I turn it. Let's see if I can get the thread started. Okay, to get a little more leverage on this ratchet head, I'm going to pull this line back and go straight down and turn and push. See, I'm really pushing in while I'm turning. Okay, now the threads have started. And I'm getting to that point where it's spinning again, so I'll just reach down here and put my finger on the socket. It feels like there was just a little bit of carbon. Okay, now it's getting hard again. Look at that. See that? Okay, now it's loose again. I'll put my finger down here to lock up that socket on the ratchet head. Okay, now it's getting hard again. Okay, it's loose. And you run this in until it bottoms out. Bring it up and you can feel it, see? Okay. There you can see how far it goes in. So that's quite a few turns, and you can imagine trying to do that by hand. So this flexible head ratchet with a long handle is really handy to use with these reamers. Okay, let's flip the ratchet and take this out. Okay, see, now it's loose. So there you got that problem again. How do we get this out of there? Because we got to turn it so many times, and it's loose on the threads now because I've cut through all the carbon. So I'm going to grab that extendable nut driver again. I'll put it through between the lines, and then I'm going to attach the 12mm socket. Okay, now we can just spin that out. Yeah, right. Oh boy, look at that. Why would I have to get a really fun one for this video? See, it's loose for a while, and then not so loose. Once again, with this rubber coupling here, this isn't designed for torque. It's just designed for spinning things in and out. So we would have to have a universal joint there if we really wanted to put some torque to it. Okay, let's see what we come up with here. It's always kind of fun to pull these reamers out. You know, I've pulled them out where they're just totally blackened with crud. Well, that one's not any much better than some of them I've seen. Look at that. Look at the amount of carbon we pulled out of there. So you see why I use grease? Now, when I install the new glow plug, you better believe it's going to go in there a little bit easier. So this proves that I need to pull all 5 of these glow plugs out and, you know, ream out the carbon in all of them. And because of that, and because of what you just saw, I'm going to go ahead and remove these hard lines before I do the other glow plugs. Now, what did we learn here today? This tool and this socket, along with the 8mm socket, is really going to be handy when doing this job. The problem is when the nut or the glow plug's loose, you can't ratchet, it goes back and forth. So this is an example of trial and error. The concept here is good. Having an adjustable length on your nut driver is good, but the rubber flex joint is not going to work. You already saw that it can't overcome resistance with stiff threads, and that's not going to cut it. So what I'm going to do is get a 1/4 inch universal socket and wrap it with a rubber hose so it's not floppy, and use that in place of this rubber coupling so that it makes it easier to get those glow plugs and reamers in and out when they come up against some sort of resistance. Before I install the new glow plug, I'm going to put a small amount of anti-seize compound. You don't need a lot. Do not gob it on, just a little bit right there in the center of the threads. That's enough. And just to be safe, I'm going to grab a hold of this with the pliers. And set it down in the hole so I don't drop it. Okay. Now, if I'm fortunate, I can get my hand down in there and spin that in. Usually when you've reamed out these carbon holes, you can get that glow plug in all the way by hand. That's going to save a lot of turning. And sure enough, it's going right in. You can't see it. My hand is barely fitting in here, and you have to be really careful these sharp corners on these hardline clamps. So run in by hand, try to get it as snug as you can. Now I can take my new ratchet wrench, set the angle on the swivel of the head, go in there and just put these about as tight as a spark plug. Not overly tight, but nice and snug. Okay, we're going to slip the wire back on. And now we got to put that nut back on, that little 8mm nut down there, without dropping it down behind the injection pump. It's really hard to do this by hand, but try to get your fingers in there to get that started. That's where that nut driver extension with the flex head really comes in handy. In order to prevent that nut from falling out of the socket, I'm going to take a piece of masking tape, put right on the end of the socket, and then I'm going to take the nut and I'm going to force it into the socket. And what will happen is that masking tape will hold that nut in place, see, it won't fall out. And then I can snake this tool down in between these hard lines. I'm going to get right in this position, then I'll just put it on there and kind of straighten out the tool. And then we'll start turning it in. Look at that. That's pretty slick. Okay, now I'll take the socket and put it on the ratchet. I'm also going to need those hose pliers to get in behind and grab a hold of that wire, because the wire will want to spin when you try to tighten the nut too. So I can take that angle. Look at how nice it is to choose the angle. Now I'm going to hold against the force of the ratchet to keep that wire from moving and tighten this down. Once again, you don't need this real tight because you have a lot of leverage on this long ratchet wrench. So there you go. That plug is done. I also have some really good manuals on how to troubleshoot pre-glow systems. Remember, proper diagnosis before you buy parts, okay? Because you really want to learn what the problem is. A lot of times you think it's glow plugs, it could be relay, it could be something else. So be sure and learn how to diagnose the pre-glow system before you start running out and purchasing parts.